Hello and welcome to Between the Lines, the podcast that brings you deep insights into the reinsurance landscape in Asia. I'm Mithun Varkey, Editor-in-Chief. We're coming to you from our Hong Kong newsroom. And in this episode, we break down the headlines that matter and spotlight the stories set to move the market in the days ahead. This week, we turn to one of our sector's hottest topics, the data center boom. I'm joined by Lay See Ong, who leads Willis's regional data center practice from Singapore. Lay See unpacks the region's most rapidly evolving risk story, surging demand for data center coverage across Asia Pacific, and the opportunities and headaches it's creating for risk managers on the ground. Stick around for a conversation that gets to the heart of where the market is heading next.
The concerns we hear most often are around interconnected risk. Data centers are highly dependent on power, cooling, connectivity, specialized equipment, and continuous operations. A disruption in one area can quickly cascade into financial, operational, and reputational consequences. So power resilience is often top of the mind of the risk managers, especially as AI workload increase power density. Risk managers are also focused on supply chain delays for critical equipment, such as transformers, generators, cooling systems, and switchgears.
Joining me in this episode is the InsuranceAsia News editorial team, Deputy Editor Andrew Mullen, Senior Correspondent Aidan Gregory, reporters Joana, Nguyen, and Roshan, Nambiar. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Mithun.
Great. Let's get started. It's been a couple of weeks of significant NatCat activity across Asia Pacific. We had 3 typhoons in the region. Typhoon Dolphin hitting parts of China, Typhoon Chanhom lashing into Japan, and Peilu that turned away from the Philippines, bringing torrential rains. Meanwhile, we also witnessed a massive earthquake that shook Indonesia's Flores Islands. Roshan, can you walk us through the key cat events from the past 2 weeks and what they mean for insurers and reinsurers on the ground?
Yeah, so in Indonesia, I'll start with Indonesia. The 7.7 magnitude earthquake that struck off Flores Island in eastern Indonesia on Saturday, it's killed at least 68 people and injured more than 200 as of today. The quake, which is just 10 kilometers deep, was centered about 68 kilometers northwest of Ende, the largest town on the island. It also triggered over 1,500 aftershocks, of which 50 have been felt on the island, as well as a brief tsunami warning on the day that the earthquake occurred. Yeah, so more than 4,500 homes were damaged and 19,000 people were forced into temporary shelters, according to Indonesia's National Disaster Management Agency, BNPB. Officials in the province of East Nusa Tenggara have declared a 14-day state of emergency to fast-track aid and unlock additional resources. The main problems they've seen is that landslides on the island have blocked roads and disrupted communications, as well as hampered relief efforts across the province. This same coastline was actually hit by a similarly powerful earthquake in 1992, which triggered a deadly tsunami and claimed more than 2,500 lives. I actually reached out to some loss adjusters who, as of this recording, are still in the process of assessing the total losses. I got word from one of them that the losses will largely be from government properties, telecommunication facilities, and electricity facilities, etc. Moving on into China, where following Typhoon Dolphin in China, the NFRA, China's regulator, the insurance industry, has received nearly 130,000 claims related to Typhoon Dolphin as of Wednesday, with estimated losses of US dollars 260 million or 1.75 billion RMB. Claims were filed across 6 provinces of Zhejiang, Shanghai, Jiangsu, Jiangxi, Anhui, and Henan, with payouts and advance payments totaling 80 million RMB as of the same deadline. From that, Ping An Property and Casualty alone has logged more than 27,000 claims, with payouts expected to exceed 650 million RMB. Following the typhoon, 4 districts on the capital Beijing's outskirts activated its highest emergency flood response as it received over 1/3 of its annual rainfall within 24 hours. Hubei, a major manufacturing hub near the capital, was already recovering from 2 rare tornadoes last month after the typhoon Maisak that killed 11 people.
Thanks, Roshan. It wasn't just China. I mean, we saw significant rains in both Japan and South Korea as well, including some landslides. Aidan, can you tell us what's the latest with the flooding in Japan and South Korea?
Japan and South Korea have had their fair share of Nat Cat activity this August. A heavy rain across Chiba Prefecture in eastern Japan has triggered widespread flooding, with over 2,500 vehicles stranded and most insured losses so far coming from motor claims. And 9 people died in the rains, tragically, and over 1,000 households reported being flooded, nearly 600 of which saw water surge above the floorboards. An estimated 1,200 cars also remain abandoned on roads, according to local media reports, with authorities working on towing them away or using jacks to move them. Residential flood damage is expected to generate a significant number of property claims, although it's too early to say what the monetary figures on these claims is going to be. Commercial property and business interruption losses appear limited so far, with only scattered reports of retail shop damage. That's the latest we've heard from loss-adjusting sources. Just across the water in South Korea, torrential downpours at the pounded southern parts of the country since Saturday have killed 1 person and injured 4 others, officials have confirmed. Heavy rains have been recorded in South Gyeongsang province, including the city of Gyeonggi, where an 800mm deluge over the weekend triggered a landslide, according to South Korea's Interior and Safety Ministry. The province received an entire summer's rainfall in just 2 days, and the rain continued on Monday this week, bringing the cumulative rainfall total to 912 millimeters by 6 p.m. on that day.
Thanks, Aidan. There seems to be quite a lot of attritional loss events occurring across the region, especially with flooding and the excessive rainfall that we're seeing, especially in North Asia. Moving on, the big European reinsurers have rolled out their half-year results over the past couple of weeks, and with them, updates on their mid-year renewals. The numbers offer a clear read on how the market is evolving as rates continue to soften. Andrew, can you bring us up to speed on how the reinsurers performed and what their results are telling us about the state of reinsurance renewals?
Hanover Re increased its premium volume by 12.3% at the mid-year renewals. This was despite a 4.5% reduction in rates on an inflation and risk-adjusted basis. The reinsurance Australian business, which renews on July 1, reported attractive growth opportunities despite the decreasing rates. However, Asia saw a decrease in premium volumes, reflecting increased competition across markets. The group's P&C reinsurance service result increased by around 33%. The segment's operating profits also rose by 17.7%. The P&C combined ratio improved to 83.2% from 88.4% a year earlier, and this is outperforming Hanover Re's full-year target of being below 87%. Munich Re, meanwhile, slashed its business volume by 9.1% during the July reinsurance renewals as the soft market forced the German reinsurer to prune business, which did not meet expectations. In its half-year statement, Munich Re said renewals during July 1, which covered North America, South America, Australia, and global clients, the volume of business written fell to 2.9 billion euros. And they also talked about the January renewals coming up and heading into that negotiation period. Munich Re said that it expects a market where sustained favourable price levels and improved terms and conditions can be upheld despite high levels of competition between reinsurers. Munich Re generated a record profits in the first half of 2026, up from 3.17 billion during the same period last year. The uplift was attributed to very low major losses in P&C reinsurance and strong investment returns. In the first half of 2026, Munich Re's reinsurance division made an insurance revenue of 18.78 billion euros. This is down from the same period in 2025. Munich Re's reinsurance unit achieved a combined ratio of 67.9% in the first half, and this is an improvement on 72.9% during the same period in 2025. For Swiss Re, it maintained a nominal price decrease of 1.2% during the June and July renewals. This was amid challenging marketing conditions. The Swiss reinsurer P&C reinsurance division renewed treaty contracts worth almost $20 billion during the first half of 2026. During the June and July renewals, which include Australia and New Zealand, the P&C reinsurance division wrote treaty contracts worth $4.5 billion in premium volume and reported a nominal price decrease of 1.2% while maintaining stable terms and conditions. Swiss Re said its resulting portfolio qualities were spotted over its 2026 financial targets. And if you want a fresh take on the results, our latest opinion piece online from Marcus Alcock is on the website and certainly worth a read for more of a deep dive into these renewals.
It's probably worth briefly mentioning just how extraordinarily low those combined ratios are, particularly in Munich Re's case. That's certainly not normal by the standards of the reinsurance industry. And it shows just how fortunate the industry has been recently in terms of global nat cat losses and tailwind effects from the end of the last hard market cycle, that even in a globally softening reinsurance market, that for the reinsurers to still be putting up combined ratios like that is quite an extraordinary moment.
Thanks, Andrew, for the roundup. And indeed, Aidan, you're right. I mean, the results are extraordinary from the reinsurers, especially on the underwriting side. They have put out some exceptional numbers. The question is, how long can they continue to do it in a softening market? On to more volatile news. The marine war insurance market remains on the edge, with risks around Red Sea escalating in recent days and prompting a wave of insurer responses. Joana, what's the latest on the Middle East situations, and what actions are insurers taking now to manage exposures and protect capacity?
Right. So last week, several P&I clubs, including Scout, North Standard, London P&I, and UK P&I, have cancelled certain war risk coverage in parts of the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean, amid heightened security concerns and a series of recent vessel attacks in the region. This is the second time this year that P&I clubs cancelled non-mutual war covers. The first time, as you remember, it was in early March after the US-Israel war on Iran broke out, which has since led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And our team have learned that with attacks on maritime shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, Red Sea, and Black Sea continuing, the resolve of marine war insurers is being severely tested, with many rethinking their appetite to the risks. A London-based marine specialist told us that the nature of the threat from geopolitical tensions have actually evolved. The market is no longer dealing solely with conventional armed conflict. It must also contend with proxy actors, terrorism, sanctions, cyber exposures, and other forms of hybrid warfare, all of which can have a direct impact on global shipping. And against this backdrop, pricing risk has become increasingly difficult. Underwriters are often required to make decisions in real time, distinguishing between short-lived events and those that signal a more fundamental change in the risk environment. And then at the same time, capacity remains available, therefore, continuing to create competitive pressures even during the periods of heightened uncertainty like now, making underwriting discipline even more essential.
Thanks, Joana. There seems to be no end in sight for the conflict in the Middle East, and we'll continue to monitor the developments from that market. In other news, we had Australian insurers come out and announce their annual results. Especially both IAG and Suncorp had their FY26 results out. Aidan, you were covering those early analyst calls. What can you tell us from the results of the Australian insurers, and how's the market looking?
It was an interesting round of results for the big three Australian insurers. The results revealed a lot about the state of the market down under. Suncorp was up first, with the Brisbane headquartered insurer reporting a 44% slide in its net profit during its 2026 financial year. This sharp drop in profitability was due to higher claims costs, particularly natural catastrophes. Suncorp, which has a heavy presence in Queensland, was particularly exposed to the severe hailstorms that struck Queensland and New South Wales in October and November last year. In its 2026 financial year, Suncorp reported $2 billion Australian dollars in natural hazard costs, exceeding its $1.77 billion natural catastrophe allowance by $254 million. Next up was IAG on Thursday, which also saw its earnings dragged down by higher claims costs in its 2026 financial year. IAG reported a net profit of $1.02 billion Australian dollars for FY26, down 24.7% from the previous year. IAG paid out 12.4 billion Australian dollars in claims, up from 10.2 billion in 2025. IAG's results were nevertheless quite strong, despite the higher claims costs. However, the collapse of Greensill Capital, the Australian supply chain financing firm, in 2021 continues to loom large over IAG. Earlier this year in May, IAG settled one front of the litigation battle arising from the Greensill's collapse, with Greensill Bank and its administrators. But this was just one front in a very, very complicated lawsuit that's still going on in the Australian courts. IAG is still a defendant in a looming mega trial in the High Court of Australia, which is due to begin in September. IAG is defending claims brought by Credit Suisse, which is now part of UBS, and White Oak entities, with a remaining aggregate value of 3 billion Australian dollars. I listened into IAG's earnings call last week, and the CEO, Nick Hawkins, did hint that IAG could settle these remaining claims before the trial is due to begin next month. IAG nevertheless maintains that it still intends to vigorously defend itself in this lawsuit, and the insurer warned that the green seal issue is unlikely to be resolved for a very long time. Given the litigation, it's likely to drag on for years if you consider the trial and any further appeals that may follow. But definitely worth a watch. It's a huge story in the Australian insurance market and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future.
Sure, Aidan. There was also QBE, which announces half-yearly results. What did that look like?
QBE was on Friday last week. It's worth mentioning that of the big three, QBE is way more exposed to international markets than IAG and Suncorp, and this was reflected in its results. Fared much better, reporting a statutory insurance operating result of $1.1 billion for the first half of its current financial year. It's a 14% increase from $988 million during the same period in the previous year, while its COR held steady at 92.8. And QBE's GWP rose 10% on a headline basis to $15 billion, up from $13.8 billion a year earlier. Its catastrophe costs remain well below allowance, with only modest impacts tied to the conflict in the Middle East.
Thank you, Aidan. I think after a couple of years of stellar results, things are looking sort of grimmer for Australian insurers, especially with the softening in rates. Apart from the big headlines of the last 2 weeks, we also had a couple of really standout stories worth looking into. Roshan, you covered the impact of the El Nino on the energy sector across APAC. What does your story say? What does El Nino mean for energy operators in the region, and where are the key exposure points for insurers?
Yeah, so that story was actually quite eye-opening. So what I understood is that El Nino is forcing energy insurers across Asia Pacific to rethink how they assess power generation and infrastructure risk. As Victoria Sargent Sompo's head of energy put it, El Nino isn't an insured peril itself, but a major risk modifier that's making loss drivers more likely and more severe. The phenomenon creates divergent outcomes across the region, so like drought and wildfire risk in some markets, whereas it could be rainfall or flood exposure in others. One thing that I found out was that hydropower output has fallen in 7 countries, which has pushed greater reliance on thermal generation just as demand rises and wildfire risk climbs. Insurers are shifting from traditional asset level underwriting to broader assessments of operational resilience, water availability, and business continuity. Also, parametric insurance was also something that was widely spoken about in the piece, and all the sources did say that it was gaining traction as a tool to cover revenue losses from heat, drought, or the supply disruptions that come from El Nino, although the success depends on the precise trigger design. So with climate change making El Nino events more intense and frequent, the resilience is becoming a key differentiator for insurability and pricing.
Right. We'll see how El Nino plays out across the region and across different sectors. We also took a closer look at the shipbuilding market, which is in the middle of a super cycle, a shipbuilding boom, with an overwhelming large share of new vessels being built in East Asia. Joana, what does this shipbuilding boom mean for insurers, and what are the emerging risks and opportunities for insurers?
Actually, the story is by our intern, Alina Wang, and it has been a very, very popular story on our site. She spoke to insurers and brokers and found out that insurance capacity for shipyard risks remain highly available due to a wave of new capital from Lloyd's, MGAs, and global carriers. Capacity could even potentially broaden next year because some insurers seek to capitalize on a shipbuilding market that is experiencing its strongest order book environment since the post-financial crisis period. And indeed, global new building orders rose by 66% year on year to 43 million compensated gross tons or CGT in the first half of 2026 compared to 26 million CGT in the same period last year. And in terms of pricing, brokers are saying that smaller shipyards are seeing modest single-digit rate reductions, while elite yards and those with limited catastrophe exposure are securing double-digit cuts amid ample capacity. However, the risk profile of a modern shipyard is becoming, far more complex than a traditional builder's risk exposure, not just limited to physical damage because of fire or natural catastrophe, but also, supply chain and the ability of shipyards to manage international stakeholder relationships. And it's also, worth noting that global shipping remains heavily concentrated in East Asia, as China, South Korea, and Japan account for more than 95% of worldwide output combined. So this kind of aggregation, along with a surge in new build orders and rising vessel values, mean that insurers are likely to remain highly focused on accumulation management, exposure quality, and program structure rather than just pricing alone. Because of this concentration, a localized geopolitical or supply chain disruption can reverberate globally. The article also offers insights about risks because of alternative fuels, along with the gap between shipyard contractual obligations and actual insurance coverage. It's very informative, especially if you're interested in marine insurance. So do check out our full article on the website.
Thank you, Joana. Yeah, it was a great roundup of a fantastic story. Certainly well worth reading. There's quite a lot of data in there as well, quite interesting. And, we didn't know there was a shipbuilding super cycle. So, let's talk about stories you're all working on. What do we have? Roshan?
With the El Nino summer coming into Australia in the coming months, I will be looking into El Nino's effects on the Australian insurance market. So for insurers, it remains a key climate signal to watch. And while it can reduce flood risks in some parts of the country, it is often linked to hotter, drier conditions, which it aids the threat of bushfires as well as heat and drought-related losses. So I'll be reaching out to people to see what they say about that.
Sure, Roshan. I'm pretty sure El Nino is top of mind for everyone, certainly for the insurance industry. So we'll look forward to that story. Aidan, what are you working on?
One thing that was flagged up in the IAG and Suncorp results last week was just how soft and challenging the New Zealand market is. And this is a story I've been wanting to look into for quite a while, and I've finally found the time to do it. But basically, we're looking into what's driving the softness in New Zealand and why is the market proving so challenging for insurers and brokers. New Zealand, of course, is not short of natural catastrophe risk. It suffers from earthquakes and storms and flooding, and there's growing concern in New Zealand about the affordability of insurance, despite obviously the fact that New Zealand is the New Zealand protection gap is relatively small. So it's an interesting case study, and it's been repeatedly flagged up by all of the major players in that market. So it'll be interesting to sort of look into the details of why it's proving to be so difficult at the moment for all the major players in the industry.
Well, we don't get a lot of story on New Zealand here, so it'd be nice to have something. Joana, what are you busy with?
So I'll be speaking to Australian gig economy specialist Protect Underwriting. They are a Lloyd's cover holder headquartered in Sydney, and they just launched last month. I hope to understand their business along with the insurance market for the gig economy in Australia after this interview.
Right, that sounds like a fantastic list of stories. Certainly looking forward to that. It's been a wonderful conversation, everyone. Thank you very much. Let's get back to work.
Thanks a lot, Mithun. Thanks, everyone.
In this episode, we're joined by Lay See Ong. Lay See, who's based in Singapore, talks about the data center gold rush in Asia Pacific, the opportunities that it presents to the insurance industry, as well as what keeps the risk managers in the region up at night. She talks about the NatCat risks in the region, as well as the risks of stressed power grids, infrastructure bottlenecks, and how underwriters can incorporate these risks into their underwriting approaches. Makes for a fascinating conversation. Listen in. We're talking about data centers today. This massive investments going into data centers, especially with the AI boom. Data centers are the talk of the town. There's pretty much a data center gold rush. Now we're seeing quite a lot of investment across Asia Pacific. Where do you see the biggest opportunities are emerging in Asia for data centers, and how do sort of the insurance industry's considerations shape those opportunities in the region?
Right. The opportunity is very significant across Asia, definitely, because demand for AI, cloud services, and digital transformations is accelerating sharply. We are seeing governments, hyperscales, and private capital commitments, substantial investment into digital infrastructure, and the development pipeline across APAC continues to expand. Based on industry estimates, APAC's data center development pipeline now exceeds 19 gigawatts. With total capital requirements at about $750 billion. So, for example, just recently, China is reportedly planning to invest around $295 billion over the next 5 years to build a nationwide network for AI data centers and computing hubs. AWS, on the other hand, has announced a combined commitments of approximately $9 billion in South Korea and has indicated plans to invest further $40 billion across 14 APAC economies to expand AI and cloud infrastructures. These are huge investments that's coming into Asia, but the opportunity is no longer simply about where demand exists. The more important question is where can capacity actually be built, operated, and scaled substantially. So that means that market with strong power availability, resilient infrastructure, access to land and water, and supportive regulatory environments are very important. This is where it will be better positions to attract long-term investments. Investors are increasingly looking at the entire ecosystems around data center and not just the asset itself. So come from a risk advisor, from a risk and insurance perspective, this is really critical. Now, we are looking at projects, and if a project faces delays due to power constraints, supply chain issues, natural catastrophe exposures, or community concerns, that can really affect financing assumptions, revenue timelines, and ultimately investors' confidence. Now, so the risk considerations are now shaping the market selections much earlier than in any of the investment process.
Before the investors select the locations for the data centers, some of these considerations are what shape their decision to go into these markets. I mean, you mentioned China, you mentioned Korea. Are there specific markets within the region that you're seeing more investment than the others? Surely all countries, all governments are talking about attracting data center investments in the region, but are there specific markets within the region that you find more interesting from an investment perspective than the others?
I'd see more inquiries and activities going on in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia. Vietnam is up and coming. There are discussions around in Philippines as well. India is also another locations. But really, when these projects are sprouting in the Southeast Asia, we are also hearing news that investments are targeting North Asia as well. So China, I've just mentioned just now. So they are in the pipeline of building more AI data centers. And I believe more news will be coming from China when China position themselves and want to be the leader in terms of technology advancement.
We've talked about investments in Southeast Asia and North Asia. Some of the things that stand out is these are markets that are very cat exposed. And there's obviously questions that you mentioned earlier in the questions about power availability and grid reliability and other things. So when you sit down with risk managers at these big AI companies, where do you see the biggest market opportunities emerging in Asia? And how do risk and insurance considerations shape those opportunities?
So the concerns we hear most often are around interconnected risk. Data centers are highly dependent on power, cooling, connectivity, specialized equipment, and continuous operations. A disruption in one area can quickly cascade into financial, operational, and reputational consequences. So Power resilience is often top of the mind of the risk managers, especially as AI workload increase power density. Risk managers are also focused on supply chain delays for critical equipment such as transformers, generators, cooling systems, and switchgears. These items can have long lead time, and any single little delay can affect construction schedules, customers' commitments, and revenue generations. We are also seeing growing concerns around natural catastrophe exposure. That is the questions that you want to drive at. Yes, it does have a lot of influence and impact. Cyber risk is also another risk exposure. Business interruptions, equipment breakdown, and liability linked to environmental and sustainability considerations are also among risk managers' concerns. So in terms of coverage gaps, the issue is often not one single missing policy. It is whether the insurance program properly reflects the way risks are connected. Now, for example, does program respond adequately if a supply chain delays affects project completions? Does it address both physical and resulting business interruptions? Cyber and operational and third-party exposure being viewed together rather than in silos? These are the questions that's in the top of mind of risk managers. And this is where the role of a risk advisor is becoming more important. It's helping clients understand their exposure across the entire full life cycle of data center operations, from site selections to construction through the operations. And resilience must be central to data center or digital infrastructure operations.
This is the sort of investments that are going into is, sort of unheard of in terms of the amount of investments that's happening. There's a lot of demand for insurance. What are the sort of trends you're seeing in terms of availability of capacity to cover some of these risks in some of these markets? And is insurance capacity and availability influencing data center projects both from financing and timeline perspectives?
This is a hot topic in the recent month. I've been hearing from news which insurance markets has ample capacity, or they have increased their capacity to write the risk. Insurance capacity remains available, but insurers are becoming more selective and more detailed in how they assess data center projects. This is not surprising given the skills and complexity and the concentrations of values involved, especially when we are looking at AI data centers, when the value of CPUs are huge, large. So for large data center developments, insurers want to understand the quality of the projects from the outset. That includes site selections, natural catastrophe exposure, power resilience, as I've mentioned earlier, construction standards, obviously, because a substandard construction will affect uptime and operations in the future, supply chain dependencies, fire protection, cooling design, cyber resilience, and business continuity arrangements. A few factors that insurers will consider when writing a risk. So from a financing perspective, this matters because insurance is a part of the overall bankability of a project. Now, lenders and investors want confidence in that key risks have been identified, quantified, and transferred where appropriate. So if coverage is constrained, expensive, or subject to significant exclusion, that can affect financing assumptions. So from timeline perspective, insurance can also influence project delivery. If risk information is incomplete, or if insurer has concerns about project resilience, this can lead to longer placement timelines, more underwriting questions, or change in terms and conditions of the policy. Now, putting the various teams in consideration together, the trend that we are seeing is that insurance needs to be considered much earlier, even though there are abundant capacity. Now, it should not be left until the end of the development process. It should not be taken for granted. The best outcomes comes when risk and insurance considerations are built into planning, design, and financing discussions from the start.
How's availability of capacity from local insurers, or do you Is it do you have to go to the international markets and London market to find capacity, or are in Asia, Asian insurers, domestic insurers being able to put up capacity to write some of this risk?
In most of the jurisdictions and territories, local market would have adequate capacity. However, it depends on the site of a data center, whether it's located within the NatCat zone. So if I take Japan, for example, if you're looking at building a data center in Osaka or near the earthquake belt, there will be NatCat exposure. So the local market would have capacity. However, given the large sum insured of a data center, we do need to take into consideration that sometimes we need to go into the international market to get capacity to support a complete placement of the covers.
While that data centers I've talked about, some of these risks are fairly well understood. I mean, NatCat risks and business interruption and project delivery, etc. But are there specific underwriting skills or underwriting considerations needed for data centers? Or do you think the markets are equipped to handle the sort of risks that underwrite the risks that data centers present?
There is a shift in the underwriting considerations. Given the increase in the capacity, insurance are also looking into understanding what are the risk protection that is in place, whether it's sufficient segregations of risk. For example, where do they house UPS standby batteries? Whether should they consider BESS? How is the cooling system that's in place? Whether are they maintaining the humidity of the data halls to ensure the uptime. It's to ensure operational readiness.
In APAC specifically, how are insurers incorporating local operational realities such as stressed power grids, infrastructure bottlenecks, and elevated sort of NatCat exposures, especially around Southeast Asia, into their underwriting approach?
APAC is not a single market, and insurers are very well aware of that. Like we have discussed earlier, each location has its own risk profile, whether that relates to constructions, power grid reliability, natural catastrophe exposure, land constraint, water availability, regulatory expectations, or infrastructure maturity. So as a result, insurers are becoming more granular in their underwriting. They are not only looking at data center building itself, but also the infrastructures that's around it. So, for example, how reliable is the grid? Is there sufficient backup powers? What are the exposure to flood, typhoon, earthquakes, or other catastrophic risk? How resilient access roads, substantial or nearby utilities? So are there dependencies on a single supplier or a single connection point? So these are the local realities that can influence capacity pricing, deductibles, exclusions, and the level of engineering information insurers required. Now, in markets where power grids are under stress, insurer will pay more attention to redundancy, backup generators, maintenance regime, business continuity planning. So in NatCat exposed locations, they will look closely at site elevations, flood protections, structural resilience, and disasters recovery measures. Especially hyperscale and co-location facilities, it can create a significant accumulation risk. So the broader point is that underwriting is moving from assets-based assessment to ecosystem-based assessment. Insurers want to understand not just the facilities, whether it's well built, but whether it can continue to operate when the surrounding infrastructure is under pressure.
Lacey, thank you. I mean, that's all the questions I have for you today. It's a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this edition of Between the Lines. Thank you all for joining us once again. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters. Find us at InsuranceAsiaNews.com. My name is Mithun Varkey. Thanks for listening.